Hi, I'm Olivia. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, my wedding day, a day filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a new chapter with a man I loved, Daniel. The sun shone brilliantly in a cloudless sky. The garden was in full bloom and our friends and family buzzed with excitement. Everything seemed perfect, or so I thought as I walked down the aisle. Radiant in my white gown, I caught sight of my father's stern face. He had never approved of Daniel, I calling him unworthy, but I love Daniel, and I had hoped my dad would eventually come around. I was wrong. After the ceremony, during the reception, the tension in the air was palpable. Dad's glare at Daniel was a silent challenge. I tried to laugh and chat with our guests, but the unease was undeniable. Then came the toasts. When Dad stood up, his voice was cold and sharp. Instead of speaking about love and happiness, he spoke of disappointment and disapproval. My heart sank. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, offering silent support. But Dad wasn't finished. He directed his venomous words straight at Daniel, accusing him of being unworthy of me. Daniel stood up, his face flushed. I love Olivia and I will spend my life making her happy. That's more than enough, he declared. Dad snorted. You make her happy, you'll ruin her life. I stood up, pleading, Dad, please, this is our day. Before I could finish, Dad's hand flew through the air and struck me across the face. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The physical pain was sharp, but the shock and humiliation cut deeper. My cheek burned as tears blurred my vision. Daniel loomed at Dad, his voice a roar. How dare you touch her? Fists flew as their anger and hurt erupted. Uncles and cousins rushed in to separate them, but the fight spiraled out of control. The sounds of the wedding band were drowned out by shouts and crashing from furniture. In the chaos, I felt a pair of arms wrap around me. It was Mom. Her eyes were filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Olivia. The wail of sirens pierced the air. The police, called by Mom, arrived and waded into the fray. They pulled Dad away, his face twisted with fury. He hurled curses as they handcuffed him and led him to the police car. The guests stood in stunned silence. The garden, once a place of celebration, now up like a battlefield. Broken glass, overturned chairs, the remnants of what should have been a day of love. I looked at Daniel, his lip bloodied, his eyes filled with a mix of rage and sorrow. He came over and hugged me tightly. I'm so sorry, Olivia. This isn't how I wanted our day to be. I leaned into his embrace, feeling the pieces of my heart breaking and rearranging. This was not the wedding day I had dreamed of, but it was a turning point, a moment that made me realize there was no going back. It was time to face the truth about my family, my father, and the life I was choosing. With Daniel as the last of the guests left, whispering words of comfort and confusion, I knew this disaster was just the beginning. It was the start of a journey I never expected, a journey of standing up for myself, for my love, and for the life I deserved, a journey of confronting the past, seeking justice, and finding peace. And it all began on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The morning after my wedding was nothing like I had imagined. There was no joyful breakfast with family, no reminiscing about the beautiful ceremony. Instead, I woke up with a stinging cheek and a heavy heart. Daniel was already up, pacing in our small living room, his face tight with anger and worry. Olivia, we can't just let this go, Daniel said, his voice firm. I nodded, staring at my hands. I know, but what can we do? He's my father, your father. He assaulted you at your own wedding. That's not a father, that's a bully. I sighed deeply. He was right. Dad's actions were unforgivable. I had always hoped for his approval, but now I realized that dream was over. As we sat at our small kitchen table, Daniel and I began to plan. We couldn't let Dad get away with what he did, not just for us but for everyone he had hurt with his toxic behavior. I think we should start by talking to the family, I suggested. If we can get them on our side it'll be harder for him to deny what he did. Daniel agreed. And what about legal action? Should we press charges? I hesitated. I don't know. I want justice, but I don't want this to drag on and consume our lives, I said softly, my voice edged with uncertainty. Daniel looked at me, his eyes filled with understanding but also determination. We'll do whatever you're comfortable with, Olivia, but he can't get away with this. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and meetings. I reached out to my aunt, uncles and cousins, anyone who had witnessed Dad's outburst. To my surprise, many were more supportive than I expected, sharing their own stories of Dad's abusive behavior. I always knew he had a temper, but I never thought he'd do something like this, my Aunt Lucy said, shaking her head in disbelief. We're with you, Olivia. It's time someone stood up to him, my cousin Mark added. Yeah, it's about time. With each conversation my resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about breaking a cycle of abuse that had gone on for far too long. Daniel and I also met with a lawyer, UNN nonsense woman named Miss Hardy. She listened intently to our story, taking meticulous notes. You have a strong case, especially with the number of witnesses, she said, but be prepared, this will be a public matter and it could get ugly. A knot of anxiety formed in my stomach, but I nodded. I understand. I can't let him think he can treat people this way without consequences. Miss Hardy gave a small reassuring smile. Good, I'll start preparing the paperwork. We'll hold him accountable. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of planning and emotional upheaval. Daniel was my rock, supporting me every step of the way. We gathered evidence, spoke to more family members and worked closely with Miss Hardy. One evening, as we sat on the couch exhausted from yet another meeting, Daniel took my hand. Olivia, are you sure about this? I mean, I'll support you no matter what, but this is a big step. I looked into his eyes, feeling a surge of love and gratitude. Unsure, Daniel, I've been pushed around in silence for too long. It's time I stood up for myself. Daniel squeezed my hand. Then I'm with you every step of the way. That night as I lay in bed, I felt a mix of fear and determination. I was about to embark on a journey that would change my life forever, but deep down I knew it was the right thing to do. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my own story. I was ready to write the next chapter. In the days leading up to the confrontation with my father, it felt like living in a suspenseful movie. Daniel and I were neck deep in our plan, gathering evidence of Dad's toxic behavior. It was heart-wrenching and empowering all at once. One sunny afternoon, I met my cousin Lily at a local coffee shop. She had always been a bit hesitant around family matters, but as I shared my story, she opened up. Olivia, I've seen it too at family gatherings. He's always so controlling and mean. I remember once he made Tommy cry just because he spilled some juice. Her words added to the growing pile of testimonies. It wasn't just me. Dad's behavior had affected so many of us. Later that week, Daniel and I met with my Uncle Ryan, Dad's brother. He had always been quiet, the type to avoid conflict, but this time he spoke up. He's always been like this, Olivia. I wish I'd done something sooner. Your mom, she suffered a lot because of him. His admission shocked me. Mom had always seemed so strong, so resilient. I had no idea. With each story, the picture became clearer and more disturbing. Dad wasn't just difficult, he was abusive, a bully who had hurt his family for years, and it was time for it to stop. The day of the confrontation arrived. My heart pounded as Daniel and I drove to my parents' house. This was it, the moment I would finally stand up to my father. Dad opened the door, his face a Mixture of surprise and suspicion. Olivia, what are you doing here? And he brought him. I took a deep breath. We need to talk, Dad. We sat in a living room, the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Daniel was beside me, his presence a silent pillar of strength. Dad, for years you've heard us, not just me but Mom, Uncle Ryan, Lily, everyone. It needs to stop. Dad's face turned red with anger. What are you talking about? I've done nothing but take care of this family. I pulled out the written testimonies, evidence of his behavior. This is what I'm talking about. Your anger, your control, your abuse. He snatched the papers from my hand, skimming them quickly. This is nonsense. They're all ungrateful, just like you, Dad. Please, I pleaded, just read them. Understand the pain you've caused. For a moment there was silence as he scanned the pages, but then he threw them down. I don't need to take this. I've done nothing wrong. I felt a wave of disappointment and anger. Dad, all we're asking for it is an apology and acknowledgement of what you've done. His voice was icy. You'll get nothing from me. You and your husband should leave. Daniel stood up, placing a hand on my shoulder. We tried, Olivia, we tried. As we walked out, my emotions were a whirlwind: disappointment, anger, sadness. Above all, there was a newfound determination. Dad's refusal to apologize only solidified my resolve. I was going to see this through no matter what. The drive back was quiet. I gazed out the window, the passing scenery a blur. This wasn't the end, it was just another step in my journey, a journey that I was more determined than ever to complete. The weeks following my confrontation with Dad were a whirlwind. The story of what he did, bolstered by the testimonies of family members, began to spread. It wasn't just within our family anymore, it was in the community, on social media, everywhere. The man who had always presented himself as respectable and upright was now being seen for what he truly was. One afternoon, as Daniel and I sat in our living room, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Mom. Her voice was hesitant, a stark contrast to her usual strength. Olivia, your father, he wants to talk to you. He says he's sorry. I felt a jolt of surprise. Dad apologizing? That was something I never expected. Mom, I don't know. After everything, Olivia, I understand if you don't want to. I just thought you should know. I thanked her and hung up. Daniel looked at me, his brow furrowed with concern. What are you going to do? I sighed, feeling the weight of the decision settle on my chest. I don't think I can forgive him. Daniel, not after everything. Daniel nodded, his hand finding mine. Whatever you decide, I'm here for you. 2 days later, I received a letter from Dad. It was an apology, or at least his version of one. He wrote about his own upbringing, his regrets, his realization of the pain he had caused. But as I read it, something felt off. It wasn't about me or the pain he had inflicted. That was about him, his feelings, his experiences. I shared the letter with Daniel, who read it carefully. It's your decision, Olivia, but remember, you don't owe him anything. I knew he was right. This wasn't just about thought, the slap at the wedding, or even the years of emotional abuse. It was about a lifetime of toxic behavior, and a letter wasn't going to fix that. The decision was hard, but I knew what I had to do. I wrote back to Dad, telling him that while I acknowledged his apology, I couldn't just forget everything. There would be no reconciliation, no going back to the way things were. The day I sent that letter was the day I felt a true shift within myself. It was like letting go of a heavy burden I had carried for years. I was choosing my own peace, my own happiness. Daniel and I began to rebuild our lives free from the shadow of Dad's toxicity. We became more involved in our community, finding joy in helping others who have faced similar struggles. One evening, as we sat on our porch watching the sunset, Daniel wrapped his arm around me. We've come a long way Haven't we? I leaned into him, feeling a sense of peace and contentment. Yes, we have, and we did it together. As the sky turned a deep orange, I realized that this was just the beginning, a new chapter in our lives, one where we were no longer defined by the pain of the past but by the hope of the future. Our journey had been long and difficult, but it had led us to a place of understanding and strength. We had faced the worst and come out stronger for it, and as I sat there with Daniel, I knew that no matter what the future held, we were ready for it. This was our story of overcoming, of justice, and of moving forward. It was a story of empowerment, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And as I looked up at the stars beginning to twinkle in the evening sky, I knew that our story was far from over. It was just beginning. Discussion: has Olivia's decision to not reconcile with her father despite his apology been the right one? Was it a show of strength and self-respect, or could it be seen as an inability to forgive and move on? What would you have done in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinions and perspectives make our community a rich and engaging place. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more content like this to you. Thank you for watching, and we can't wait to read your comments.